Greetings. I thought it'd be fun to make a little production diary of sorts, detailing some music that I'm currently working on, and basically my process of taking a rough demo and turning it into a fully, finally mixed and mastered full version of a track. Just to provide a little bit of context for any new viewers, my name's Josh, and I'm a producer from Brighton in the UK, and also multi-instrumentalist. And I also have a lot of experience as a mixing engineer, having worked on quite a lot of records by other artists. And I'm probably best known for starting a band or an alias thing called Luo, and basically that project's kind of about combining electronic music production with real instrumentation and influences from genres like IDM, breakcore, jazz fusion, in general quite heavy experimental weird styles of music, but keeping things pretty groovy and hopefully fun to listen to is kind of what I'm aiming to do at all times. Anyway, a little while ago, one of my good pals called Aleks Podraza, who's a fantastic pianist and also a drummer, who has his own band project called Voronoi. Alex just sent me a message a little while ago asking me if I would be interested in recording the guitars for his project, and I kind of felt like it would be really fun to get a little bit more involved and collab with him a bit closer. What I'm looking at here is Alex's demo for a new project that he's been coming up with, which is kind of like a melodic metal kind of vibe. All of this music that you're going to be hearing was originally written by Alex, and it's all his ideas and his brainchild. I'm just kind of going to be upgrading what he's done, but hopefully it all kind of makes sense what I'm going to do to this by the time this video is finished. So I thought to switch things up a bit, I'll see if I can document the process of what I'm going to do to this as I'm doing it. Hopefully this will kind of be a bit of a story or a journey through recording. So I will show you kind of a lot of my tricks and techniques as I go along as well. So it should be pretty fun. With all that said, I'll sort of get into it now. Okay, so to start off with, what I'm looking at here is one of Alex's projects, one of his demos for a track of his that he's written called False Widow, after the spider. It's a bit of a beast. It's about 8 minutes long, and yeah, it's this kind of progressive melodic metal thingy bobby. Interestingly for me, the whole song is in 4/4, but Alex is really, really good at making 4/4 sound weird. I think that'll become a bit more obvious as I start getting into this. Because we're working remotely, I don't actually have a lot of the plugins that Alex has used to put this together, which means that a lot of the instruments haven't loaded up, although he has also sent me a guide bounce or a WAV of this track exported from his end with all of the sounds in it, so that I can at least listen to it and reference and know what the structure is basically. But yeah, a lot of this probably won't actually play. I've got this track here at the top, which is program, which he's put in inverted commas guitar, and this is basically what he wants me to record on a real guitar and layer in. But before I can do that, I think there's quite a lot of other work that I need to do before I can get to that stage, and I'm going to try and detail that as I go. But let me skip to this bit because I know that that's where you're actually going to start hearing something. So okay, so that's a little bit of an example of what I'm dealing with here. And I really, really like the riff and I really like the idea. And I think it's going to sound great when it's kind of done fully and kind of realized. But at the moment, obviously, you can hear it sounds quite demo-y and quite MIDI arrangement, MIDI demo vibes, because that is exactly what it is. Obviously, it's all using MIDI to get the idea just mapped out in the software. But of course, it can't really stay, and going to need to replace a lot of it or enhance a lot of it before I can kind of move on, I feel. So especially with the drums, you can kind of hear like the pattern's cool, but the actual drum sound is quite fake and kind of demo-y. For me, just personally, I find it a little bit easier in instances like this sometimes to just start from scratch, and I'm going to be working at it a little bit differently. And the first thing for me to do is going to be to recreate or replace all of these drums with some higher quality samples and a higher quality drum track from Addictive Drums 2. I'm going to cut this here and skip over to showing a bit of that in action. So I've begun to kind of reconstruct Alex's arrangement in Logic myself, my end. Unfortunately, I didn't capture myself doing it, but I've spent the last kind of day or two programming this drum section out in Addictive Drums 2, which you can see here. And to explain this, so at the top here, I've got this audio track, which you can see it's called False Widow, No Click. And this is basically just Alex's original demo for the project and this song. So it's all the stuff that was in Ableton that I don't have, just in a audio file that I can listen to as the whole track. And what I've done is basically brought that into a new Logic session, and then with Addictive Drums next to it, I've gone through the entire song and just kind of made sure that my Addictive Drums programming matches what Aleks had originally, but with a fuller and kind of beefier kit sound to back it all up, and kind of doing some more realistic programming as well. So something in Alex's original session is that he used a lot of looping regions and kind of just loop sections up. So I've kind of approached this with a little bit more of a human feeling in mind and tried to add a lot of variations and subtle differences as it plays through. Anyway, I'll give you a little play of how this is sounding so far. So it's unmixed at the moment. You can hear some of the levels are a bit messed up and my stereo out is clipping. I don't really care about that at the moment. I'll sort that out later. But you can hear already that these additions are kind of just bringing out Alex's arrangement and lifting things up a little bit compared to how things were sounding in the demo, especially with the drums. With Alex's drum part, the whole way through he's just used the same snare hit because that's all he had in his library. Obviously I've got a few more options available in Addictive Drums. Particularly recently I got the pack that adds this nice the Istanbul clap stack, which is great. So I thought I'd have some fun with that in there. And for example, in the intro part, rather than having the backbeat playing on the snare, I've changed it to hitting on the clap stack, which I think just helps bring a bit of dynamic. I don't think the intro should be like the full bore drums, so you kind of soften them a bit by having that lighter clap stack sound instead of the snare. So I've made that. And yeah, it's just kind of like subtly varying, you know, adding some little things like that hi-hat fill there, little things like that, and you know, changing the hi-hat and ghost note sticking so that it's not just doing the same thing every single bar. Subtle alterations and stuff just, I think, helps bring a bit more of a human feeling to the programming, so it's not so rigidly looping all the time. But yeah. I like those weird little fills and kind of trippy things that spin you out but then ultimately bring you back to the groove. So it's kind of like something I like to do a lot of the time. These two sections reoccur, but in the second time it happens I like to make the drums go a little bit crazier and kind of add details that weren't in the section before. But yeah, now that I've got the Addictive Drums mapped out for the whole song, I'm now at the point where I can start recording in some real stuff and real instruments. Just that simple thing is going to add a lot to this software instrument arrangement. So the first thing I'm going to record in over this is going to be the bass. So I'm going to take a break here for the evening and I'm going to come back to this tomorrow and I'll get the bass in then and pick up the video from there. Cool, so I am now back this afternoon. It's Saturday the 25th of October at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And I'm going to have a look at tracking in the bass for this. So I've created a new blank session to record into, like a tracking project. And the reason for that is because my other project had various software synths running in it, like Addictive Drums and Serum, which are all things that are fairly CPU intensive. And basically I want to try and get the CPU load down and my recording buffer size as low as I can possibly get it in order to minimize any latency that I'm getting, which just means that I can record as tightly as possible. So what I have in here, basically, I have brought along the MIDI for Addictive Drums, and I do have that running live in my recording session just in case I need to tweak anything, but I'm actually going to keep that off for now. And I have this audio version of the drums. Below that, I've got the bass as MIDI. That's so that I can reference the notes for each section just to double check what I'm playing. And then everything else from the arrangement I've just bounced or exported into this one single audio file at the bottom, just so I've got some level control here in the recording session. I think that's pretty much all there is to say about that. So the bass I'm going to be using and recording with is this 5-string Sire V3. It's a bit of a budget bass, so I think I got this for around £315 when I bought it about 5 years ago. So to record, I'm just going directly into the audio face. I'm going directly from my bass into the audio interface, so there's nothing between it. You might see that I have a pedal board back there, but I'm not using it. So this is what the bass sounds like, just coming in direct with nothing on it. So the action seems to be really low at the moment. I've got fresh strings on it. Something seems to have changed since I was last playing this, because it feels very spanky and like a low action, but I think that's actually going to work for what I'm doing. And before I put any amp simulator or anything on this, I'm just going to set my input gain level. And essentially what I'm aiming to do is kind of set it so that my hardest plucking again is sort of just below where it clips over 0. So the amp sim I'm going to use is going to be Neural DSP's Parallax plugin, and I'm actually going to do that to a mono to stereo conversion. Okay, so that should work as a kind of starting place. I don't really tend to use presets in this plugin. I just kind of use the default settings and then use the EQ shaping and mess about with the distortion amounts to get a tone. The first thing I'm going to record in is the kind of main riff happening over here. So the first thing I'll be doing is obviously working out how to play this on the bass neck. So I'm just going to have a look at the MIDI notes here, and we've got these first two. So that's just the low B, which is down there, so I can get that in fairly easily. But this little grouping here of this this little 6 note, so that is, what is that? Da 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 da. All right, so that's D. So that's what that is. So that's relatively easy to accomplish, but this little bit here. Yeah, so on standard tuning, that's sort of, it's a little bit uncomfortable to try and play that at that speed by fretting it. I like playing that riff with this kind of hammer-on thing here, or this pull-off technique. Like, I think that gives it a bit more of this kind of legato sound, which I think is going to work for the riff compared to playing that like, you know, like, there's a few ways to play that, but like fretting every note. I think that kind of pull-off thing will work a little bit better for that. But in order to get that, I want to be able to incorporate that G note in the kind of pull-off technique way of playing it. So unusually for this track, I kind of worked out that the easiest way to do that would be to actually tune up the E to a G. Where is it? So it's there now, which is... which makes that a little bit easier to play without having to move my hand around quite as much for the speediness of that riff. So and I'm going to try and get a rough take for this section. Let's see how that goes. Messed up straight away. I've got a kind of rough guide take in there now, and what I'm going to start doing is just recording over the top of it, and you'll see that what happens when I do that is Logic will put my second take in a sort of take folder underneath this one. Now you can see that I've recorded in that second take. It's muted take 1 and it's put take 2 above it. But what I like about this is now it makes it quite easy to comp or, you know, put together your final bass take using selections of a bunch of your takes, basically. So I could use the first note from take 2 there, but then have it immediately transition into take 1 for that moment if I thought it was better. And I will tend to line that up with the drums track above it so that I can look at the timing of the transients. And for example, you can see that I'm just slightly, you can see my timing, I'm slightly ahead of the kick. So if I had more takes here, I would select the one where I was naturally closest to the kick. Even if you're a super tight player, and I've got a lot of practice playing and recording music to metronome and to click track. I mean, I've been doing that for years, so I've gotten quite used to it. But even so, it's like I'm still a human being. So between takes, there is times where I might be a hair ahead or a hair behind some of those rhythmic stabs. And obviously because it's the recording, I basically want everything to be as perfect as possible, but without, I could sort of cut and move things like that. I can cut audio files and I can move them around. And I could also use flex time, for example. So I could start like warping the audio to make things more in time sort of digitally after the fact. But I don't really want to do that. I still want to have my natural playing because I find that especially flex time, it kind of can mess up the sound and it can introduce artifacts when you start time stretching things. And that's especially noticeable, I think, on bass and guitar parts like this. And it really needs to be as naturally tight as possible. So this is the way I'm going to achieve it. And also what's nice is, you know, there's with a riff like that, I haven't practiced it that much. I've basically just got it under my fingers to shoot this video, but I haven't spent that much time sort of rigorously practicing it. There's going to be points here where I might need to drop in just for a certain moment to nail it, and Logic makes that really easy with this punch in range. So you can see I can just highlight a certain amount of bars and it will just drop me in for that section, and I can just replace that little moment, which I'll show you in a little bit. For now, I'm just going to try and get another take that I feel a bit more happy. Keep messing up a couple of bits there. So for example, there's that little bit where it's sort of, so that little bit where the pattern changes, I'm just going to drop in for that. Okay, so I've got a little bit of time. I'm just going to see if I can move on. So you can see now, because the part is different, and maybe just because I'm playing it less hard, you can see that it's recorded a fair bit quieter on the way in compared to the section before. So I'm actually going to turn up my input gain for this part to compensate. And then the other thing is, like, do I want to do the whole thing on the lower octave? Okay, so I have that now in the take folder as an option, so I can switch. once I've kind of decided if I like that as the final version, then I would record a few more takes to give me a few other versions to comp in. And I would probably, I'm not going to do it here for this video because it would just take too long, but going through literally every single kick hit and then matching it up to the bass. And then, you know, say for example, if that note, I mean, both of those are played pretty tightly, but I could audition. So you can kind of change what you played after the fact, or comp in the bits where you got it absolutely bang on with the kick, because there'll be variance between each take. Before I record the guitars over the top of it, I obviously want the bass to be as in time as it possibly can be, almost to that robotic extent, but without it actually being robotic. Still like the natural result, it's just with that careful comping editing. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy paste the bit that I already recorded from earlier, because I kind of don't need to do it again. I'm pretty sure there's some subtle differences in this version of the riff. Okay, so we do have a little change here, but I'm just going to record in, so it's just that. That's most of the first part of the song. So we come to this section here near the end, which is this really slow, crushing, heavy breakdown, which is kind of hilariously so. I haven't learnt this or learnt the stabs, because it's just like quite a lot to memorize. I think the easiest way to do this is if I literally just stare at the programming. I'm going to just try and play in time with it. So I'll see how far I get. What I like about this heavy section is it's preceded by this piano solo, which is quite intimate. Yeah, pretty delicate and spacious. Well, that was very nice, wasn't it? It's gotten a little bit darker in here. I had a break for a couple of hours, just went and had some food, had myself a little Japanese curry, it's delicious. And now I'm back and going to finish off that last little bit of bass. So not sure how much footage I got just before I decided to have a break, but I just gotten up to this final heavy riff outro section. But I haven't kind of memorized the rhythm or the stabs that he's written, and they're pretty weird. So again, to record this, I'm just going to watch the MIDI and try and record it in by sight. So there's a couple bits in there where that last bit, for example, the note, Alex has decided to go for a B flat. I can't get lower than that in the current tuning, so I think for those bits, I'm just going to have to drop tune my low string half a step down so that I can get that note in. I think it's really cool how Alex has managed to make that go around the 4/4 beat in such a weird way. It's quite fun. But anyway, so just going to grab the tuner and drop my low B to A sharp or B flat. And just that last little bomb bomb. Ugh, but without that nasty bit of flappy noise on the end. Nice. I might end up going back through some of this and kind of going really hard on the recording of it, but I think for now I'm just going to roll with what I've got here. What I'm doing is flattening all of my bass recordings so that they're not take folders anymore. I'm just going to commit to the parts that I've got, and I'm going to highlight all of those regions, right click, and then join them together. And that's going to create one single audio file for my bass DI track. Something I'm going to do to this straight away, just to kind of clean up. You can probably hear there's quite a lot of noise on this, especially from the distortion. You can turn up the gate to get rid of some of that, but I'd like to get rid of some of that noise before it hits parallax and all of that distortion and stuff. So I've shown this off before. I'm going to use a program called Isotope RX to just remove some of the noise from my bass recording. So that's my DI, and I'm just going to select this chunk here where there's sort of nothing going on, and I'm going to learn that in my denoise module, and then when I hit process, that would have just cleaned up some of the noise on my signal, so it should be a little bit cleaner going to the distortion now. One other thing that I'm going to fix quickly, which you might be able to see here. So like that, for example, that's a massive click that I don't necessarily, it's not meant to be there. It's kind of generated from joining those two regions together. So that just helps to sort of clean that up a little bit. I'll do that for a few of the really massively intrusive ones like that. You can tell them apart because they go right up through the spectrum like that, whereas the natural bass transients don't get up quite that severely. So that might not be problematic when it's actually going through the amp sim, but I've just saved that audio file and the processing that I've just done to it. So now when I go back into it in Logic, that would have removed quite a bit of that noise. So there's a lot less of that hiss than there was before. And now the gate, I can turn up the gate less. I have no idea what caused that to happen. That was weird. I'm gonna have to watch that back. Anyway, you don't have to turn up the gate quite as severely to get rid of the noise now, because I've kind of diminished it with RX. So we can get that a little bit lower and have it do its thing at a lower threshold than it would have been without me denoising it in RX. So that's quite useful. I think I'm going to commit to the bass and move on from the bass there. So it's now Sunday the 26th of October at about 23 minutes past 8. Now it's the moment that we've all been waiting for. I'm going to record the guitars in with my newish 8-string guitar. So this is actually a budget 8-string by Gear4Music. You can still get some pretty good sounds out of it, which I'm going to be doing today. And essentially I'm basically just going to be doubling up the bass, but with a kind of heavy tone. So I think to start with, I'm just going to go with, I'm going to load up Archetype Abassi on this, and this time I'm going to go for a mono instance. So on this, I've got the E, again, the low, what would be the low E on the 6-string guitar tuned up to a G, so which means I can get that. So it's pretty easy to access that in the same way that I would play it on the 5-string bass. So the plan here is basically I'm going to record 2 versions of this guitar track so that I can pan each one left and right. So what I'm going to be tracking here is the first left channel. And it's really important to do a couple of things with this. One is going to be to maintain mono and not accidentally making this stereo. The reason being, if I make that a stereo track and then I pan it, I'm actually not panning that sound. I'm just cutting it in half essentially, without going into too much detail. So, and then the other thing is going to be, unlike the bass track where I was kind of riding my input preamp gain for different sections of the song, because what I'm going to be doing here is recording something that I'm planning to pan stereo left and right, I need them to be identical, otherwise it will sound a bit weird if there's all these discrepancies. And if I start messing about with changing the input gain whilst I'm doing this, I'm just going to create a lot of headaches for myself. So I'm going to set it in one exact place and not change it until I've done both left and right tracks. Okay, so there is something a little bit cheeky about this, but I'm fairly sure this is absolutely a pro tip. I'm not going to record the whole riff. I'm just going to record a small section of it and get that right, and then loop it and then add the bits in. Let me show you what I mean. So I could record a whole take all the way through, but the trouble is I'm probably going to make a few mistakes here and there. I might get a bit of string noise and a bit of scuff in some of the bits where I just don't mean to do it. And it's like I could probably never get around that no matter how much I practice my technique. I just feel like there's always going to be that holding back getting an absolutely perfect take all the way through. So I'll show you what I mean. Close enough. Okay, so as you can see, that's like a whole take through of me playing that whole section live and getting the whole thing in one take. Doing that is going to hold me back from getting the sonic result that I actually want. So some of the problems with this take, for example, let's have a listen to that. So straight away, you can hear on the first time I play that, let me get that in there so I can actually hear. You can hear the first time I do it, I successfully get that last note in there. But because of how quickly I have to go from, so I'm using my index finger there, and then I have to very quickly get my, because that C note happens immediately after that note. So going from, sometimes I get it in, but for example, the second time that comes around there, you hear that I miss it, basically. It's just diddle-a-dud, not diddle-a-diddle-a-dud. So little things like that are really, really difficult to get consistent. I don't know, maybe that's just because I'm not very good at guitar, but yeah. Yeah, you can hear there in the gap, there's quite a lot of just that. Get a bit of string noise there, so that kind of thing. So to actually get this as clean as possible, I'm just going to record so that, and then I'll do the bit of it separately. So check this out. And now I can just do a few takes of getting that bang on. There's another little pro tip when it comes to comping up guitars like this, is to actually, you can see that I've set my range so that it starts immediately where my last take stopped. But that, if you do that, that is what can cause those big discontinuity clicks. So I'm actually just going to drag that out so that I pick up that last. So now I can draw that up to there. It links up a lot nicer. So that way I'm not quite chopping off the transient of where my next part starts there. So, and yeah, for example, like timing wise, again, in this take here, I'm quite ahead of where that kick transient is landing, right? So for example, that little bit, I could select my portion from take 2. However, you can see in take 2, I let the note ring out for a little longer. So I might add a few more of these just to give me some more options. So now I can be a bit more forensic about which ones I want in there. That's going to be my loop. Let's just copy paste that until we get to the bit where it slightly changes, and I'll drop in for that bit. There we go. Cool, then I'm just going to copy paste the remainder of that out. And essentially now I'm going to duplicate my track, mute the first one, and I'm just going to do the same thing again so that I get my right channel in here. So here's the thing, obviously, because this is quite important because I'm intending these guitars to be stereo left and right. Now what I'm going to do is pan each of these hard left and hard right. I'm going to unmute my first track, and now basically I'm going to loop up that riff and just have a quick look. And yeah, you can probably already hear how much just that, the two guitars and the stereo width thing does a lot for the whole sound. But yeah, now I can be really on it with like, for example, I'm going to go through the take here. To be honest, what I should have done as well is left my bass with all the takes in that I'd recorded for that as well, because then I could match that up with the guitar. And essentially it's kind of like having a look at both the volume and the timing of each of these channels. So for example there, I've hit that open note a lot louder in the right ear than I did in the left ear. So little things like that, I might want to have a look at just popping in something a bit more like that, although that is horrendously out of time now. So it's kind of that type of thing. And if I feel now that maybe my left channel is a little bit weak, maybe I could just punch in a low note on that left channel so that it matches my right channel a little bit more. Okay, so it's just a low gong. So let's just add that in. So now they're a bit more. So it's things like that, you know, and kind of getting pretty detailed with like how each side looks. You can kind of spend as much or as little time on it as you think is necessary, I would say. So just having a look at who's kind of tightest with each other. It looks like something like that might be a little bit better. And then here, I'm a little bit out. So let's slide that over. And yeah, so this is kind of the trick of it, and this is why it's worth recording as many takes as you can so that you've got more to play with, if that makes sense. I would spend a lot longer on this than what I'm doing here, but yeah, so I think that's given me my loop. So I'm going to go from there and I'm just going to loop up this chunk that I've recorded in because I think I'm happy with that comp. So again, it's 2 mono tracks, hard panned left and right. That is the process that I would take for if it's the main riff like that, and that's kind of meant to be like the hooky bit of the song, or I want that kind of heavy sound. That's pretty much the way I'm always getting there. But I can go further with this. There's a bit more that needs to be done. Actually denoising this is going to really help. And then I'm going to open that in iZotope RX. So you can see over here, I've got a bunch of noise. Let's remove some of that again to cut out some of the noisy amp situation I've got going on. So that should get rid of a bit of that. Now I'm going to join these regions together to get an even more gated sound out of this and an even tighter, kind of cleaner thing. I'm going to group my bass and my 2 guitar tracks together so that I can cut them up and edit them as a group. Quite subtle, and you might not really notice it unless you're quite keen-eared. It's little things like that. So there, on the end of that guitar, that little like sort of chuk thing, I want to get rid of things like that. And I'm going to do it uniform so that the bass and the guitar are kind of cutting in and out at the same time. So for example, usually I don't put the bass on the same group, but that might end up sounding weird. Let me just see what I can do here. I'm going to start. Okay, so the idea of putting these on a group is when I put a cut in one of these audio files, it should do it to all 3 in the same place. So that means I can click and drag my whole bass and guitar arrangement as one unit. I'm going to put tiny fade outs on where I make cuts. And just put in some few more gaps of silence, essentially, between the... So like there, for example. Let's get rid of that little bit on the end. That's going a little bit extreme. So I kind of like to not chop things exactly so you can see that's like before I had it cut up to that bar line. Usually if you just let it go over a bit like that and then do a little fade out after it, it sounds a bit smoother. So I'm just going to go through this and do the whole thing, and I'll show you what it sounds like at the end. It's just going to take me a minute or 2. Okay, so now that I've completed that editing just for that section, that's kind of what my bass and guitar track now look like together. You can see all the gaps where they're cutting to silence are uniform. Most of them should have little tiny fades on the end or the starts just to kind of diminish any chance of getting a click at the start of the audio regions. And also you can see I've been careful. So what you want to do when you're editing this, you usually want to leave a little bit either side, just so you're not chopping off your guitar transient, because sometimes that might be a little bit ahead or behind. The fade in shouldn't be affecting the tone or the attack of my input note, because the fade in is done. Obviously, so this looks like a big fade in because I'm zoomed in. So actually that fade in's not really audible, but it should be enough to kind of just get rid of the click that happens where the start of that region cuts. I've kind of leveled things a bit. So I've just tucked the two guitars under drums and bass, because the two mono guitars playing together kind of double the loudness of the whole guitar. So then you need to turn them both down to compensate a bit. I'll give this a play and let's see how it sounds. Yeah, that's essentially done what I wanted it to. But now kind of the fun begins with the tweaking and the tone selection. I wish you could link these two plugins together so that if you make a change in one of them, it like changes the preset in the left or right ear. So for example, if I want to try out, maybe I'll try out my Filthy Tone 2, I'll have to change that in both archetypes. So I still have quite a lot of the song left to do. I've only managed to do that section. I think I started filming, when did I start filming? At like 8:20. So it's kind of taken me just shy of nearly 2 hours to get that far. It wouldn't normally take that long. It's obviously because I'm doing a YouTube video and having to stop and start the recording and stuff like that, and like explaining what I'm doing as I'm going along kind of makes it all take a lot longer than it would if I was just doing it without filming myself. So it's not as long as that, and I've obviously been messing about quite a lot with various takes, but that hopefully gives an idea of kind of like how to get that kind of clean result for really, really high gain guitar riffs like that, and the djenty kind of thing. Not sure if anybody else does this, but it works for me. So yeah, that's how I like to do it. I don't think I'm going to have much time left to do this tonight, so I'm probably going to have to come back to the rest of the song another time, and this is already quite long, so just giving myself like 2 hours of footage to edit through. So I think I'll wrap this portion of the guitar take here, and I'll come back to some other bits and bobs when I get the chance. You can see my project is starting to look like this, and I'm now up to... And there we go. That's the whole song for the main chunky riff bits anyway, done. And my Logic session now looks like that. Cool. It's taken me that long to arrive at this, basically. So I've got all the drums programmed. I've recorded the bass and a bunch of the guitars. It is now Friday the 31st of October, actually Halloween, so I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of some extra guitars into here. So in other news, I recently got myself a Helix LT for guitar, and it's pretty good fun. Something I'm going to do straight away is kind of add some ambient swells and sort of post-rocky style ambient layers to this here and there. I'm going to use my little patch here, which you might be able to see I've called I'm Just Swell. So I do have a pedal board, and on that pedal board I had a Line 6 DL4 delay pedal, which I really, really loved, and actually this is the second one of these that I've owned, but recently unfortunately it died, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, well, I could buy a new unit and replace it, or I could get one of these which happens to have that exact effect that the DL4 has on it. So it's this auto volume echo. On the Helix, if I go into the legacy delays, all of those are actually what were originally on the Line 6 DL4, so it's the exact same effect essentially, and I have that on here also in combination with everything else that it offers, which I'm having a lot of fun with at the moment. So what this effect does is so yeah, it kind of turns the guitar into, it's almost like an EBO effect, or like a reverse delay, or like a volume swell, but it has that nice kind of trailed delayed echo afterwards. And with the tap tempo, you can just get that in time with any track that you're playing. And something else I have going on the Helix with my setup is I've got the foot pedal set as a pitch bend. When it's all the way up, it's going to be pitching the guitar down 2 semitones, so I can go like... And combining that with this delay, is really nice. Also combining that with spooky mode, or just the vibrato effect. And then also adding reverb after that. Yeah, so I can get some nice kind of ambient stuff out of all of that, and I might just have a little mess around and see what kind of results I get out of it. So obviously, because I'm going through the Helix now, I'm coming out of this in stereo using the XLRs on the back, and then they're coming straight into my interface on a pair of inputs on the back here. You can see what I can do is I could link the first 2 channels. So if I link inputs 1 and 2 here, or outputs 1 and 2 from the Helix, I can now control both of those on a single channel. So now recording into Logic, I'm doing it as a stereo recording, unlike what I was doing with these mono tracks that I wanted to hard pan earlier, because basically I want to record the effects like the reverb and the delay from the Helix in stereo. See, I just find when you record stuff like this in with a mono reverb, it doesn't really sound as cool, or it doesn't really sound as wide as it could do. And also because I don't need to use the amp sims, because I'm already sort of running them in here, as you can see there. And if I was to engage my other tone, so yeah, that's just me messing about there. But now I'm actually going to start trying to figure out some notes or something cool to play over Alex's arrangement. Something like that might be kind of cool. So I'm just going to record and see where it takes me, and then I'll kind of edit what I've done afterwards. I'm just going to kind of randomly noodle and jam some of this. Yeah, I think that's a take of that. Okay, so I tracked in some of those swelly guitars earlier, and I'm going to attempt to record in some vocals. What I've done is brought in the MIDI of the chords that Alex is playing on piano. I'm going to do some sort of like choir-like textures just to kind of fatten up the stereo width and fatten up the arrangement of what's there with my voice. And I'm going to show how that can be really easy to do, especially with take comping. I'm running this API Vision channel strip by UAD on this microphone at the moment, so it's kind of giving me a bit of a nicer sound. You can see here I've got like this chord, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to record myself singing each one of these notes and then double track each one, and I'm going to start with like the top note of each chord as like one vocal layer, and then I'll do like that section as the second layer, and so on until I've got all the chords but as vocals. So I'm just going to drop in for this section here where it starts to build towards the riff. Hello, 1 2 1 2. Right, so that's my voice coming in here. And yeah, I'm not going to be singing particularly loudly, but I'm going to boost the input gain on my preamp to pick up my quiet voice so it's as loud as it would be if I was singing quite loudly. And let's just see how this goes. I'll just look at the MIDI so I can track where the note's going as I do this. I'm going to turn down my headphones a little bit so they don't bleed into the microphone. And here goes. so I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about that. I'm just going to immediately duplicate this track, and I'm going to record that again a second time. So I've got my double tracked vocal layer. So I'm going to do the next layer, this note sequence here. So let's get that in there. And something I'm going to do is sing this in falsetto and do it the octave up. So okay, so really not amazing vocal takes. I'm obviously straining my voice quite a bit because I'm doing this really quietly. But I'm going to show off a trick to get vocals like that actually sounding kind of halfway decent. So let's see what that sounds like dry. So not bad, but what I'm going to do is put a little plugin on that called Little Alter Boy, which is like a pitch correction sort of doodad. But what I'm going to do with that is experiment a bit. First of all, I'm going to decrease the formant by about -2, and you'll hear this just kind of like alters my voice in a sort of quite interesting way. So I'm just going to duplicate that out across all of these, which might make my CPU go a bit nuts. It's not for everyone, but yeah. I'm also going to enable quantize mode on all of these and just see how that might affect it. So that will make things sound a little bit more electronic and a bit auto-tune kind of vibe. Depending on how I've sung it, you might not hear that too much, and it might just kind of help to correct some of that pitch wobbliness, or introduce, it could also introduce some kind of weird artifacts, but I actually quite like these, and it's for my own vocals, I quite like it. It's like a stylistic thing, but yeah. So you can hear it gets a couple bits wrong. But yeah, the basic idea being I can send these all to a group like this aux bus here that I've just done. So if I call that vocals, now I can put a plugin on this single aux and affect all of the vocals at once. So for example, there I can basically put some EQ on my vocals, all of them at the same time, and then also of course I could put a reverb on all of that. So yeah, that can work quite well, and I'll probably add in a fair bit more of stuff like that for the rest of the arrangement. Today I'm going to probably wrap it up here. I'm not filming myself, I'm just doing a quick screen capture. Today is Saturday the 1st of November, so I've come back to this the next day, and I'm actually going to re-record those vocals that I did last night, just so I can get better vocal takes, because to be honest, I wasn't entirely happy with how they were sounding, because obviously I couldn't really control my voice as well when I was having to sing really quietly, so I'm sort of doing it properly. Just quickly, one of the first things that I'm taking a bit more care with these vocals, before I put Little Alter Boy on them, you could hear that in last night's takes, when I engage that pitch quantization mode, not only does it change the tone of my voice, but some of the note detection, some of the pitch correction that it was doing, it was getting the notes wrong. So I haven't put Little Alter Boy on these yet, but what I have done is used Logic's flex pitch mode, which allows you to do some little bit of correction of the tuning and other things like sort of sorting out the vibrato of the notes. To be honest, I think flex pitch in Logic isn't amazing at this task. There's a piece of software called Melodyne, which is absolutely fantastic for tuning vocals like this. But in the case of these vocals where I'm just kind of singing long held R's and O's, they're not particularly finicky or fiddly vocals, so they actually respond quite well to having a little bit of pitch correction done using flex pitch in Logic. Or, you know, If you've sung a note just a little sharp or flat, then it's very easy to correct it. And I think, this is what professionals will do to their vocal takes. So I will be doing that to every single one of these vocal takes, but not being too harsh on it. So if I go through to this next chunk, so if I move my mouse cursor over one of these little blobs, you can see I can control different things. So you've got pitch drift, so you can see what that would affect. Tame a little bit of that, when what I do and what I notice a lot of singers will do is when they're warming up into a note, they won't hit it. It won't just be like, there'll be like a little, a sort of slide up into it. So you can kind of correct that a little bit with the pitch drift. And then also this vibrato line, you see if I make that completely flat, then what you'll end up with is that very synthesized auto-tune sound. So that kind of thing, which, yeah, I don't want to go that far with it, but a bit of that tightening of the vibrato just helps the vocal sound a little more intonated and a bit more in tune with itself. And as I'm going to be stacking up a lot of these, that starts to add up and helps the vocal sound a bit more professional, essentially. But yeah, I'm not going to go too hard with that because, yeah, I don't want it to sound like hip hop. I still want to sound kind and natural. And then the idea being, if I put Little Altar Boy on these now, and then now I enable the pitch quantization, if there's any weird moments where it doesn't quite detect the note right, then I can correct it using flex pitch feeding into Little Altar Boy. So let's see if that happens here. So there at the start, because it detects that as two notes, it's going So if I want it to just go I can try that. So I'm just going to go through and repeat that entire process and do the whole song's worth of vocals and do this processing to it. So I'll see how long that takes me. Okay, so I've just finished recording all the vocals, I think, for the whole arrangement. That has taken me about an hour and 35 minutes to do. So these are all my vocal tracks now. And I think they sound a little bit better than they did yesterday. I haven't put Little Altar Boy on them yet, but I have done a lot of the pitch quantization for all of it. But something that can actually be useful in vocals is to denoise them in RX, much like I did with the bass and guitars earlier, just to get rid of any background noise I might be picking up from this microphone. Again, I'm not going to subject you to watching all of it because it's quite a tedious, boring process, but essentially what I'm going to do is highlight that range, so the whole track's worth of VOC 1L low, and I'm just going to right click and join that together so that I get one long audio file out of that, essentially. If I click on one of these audio tracks and I hold down Shift and press W, it'll open that whole file in RX. So if I do that now, you should see, here we go. Now I've got that vocal file in here. There's a few things that I could do to this, but I'm pretty much just going to get the noise profile and then I'm stripping out the silence of these vocals. So once again, I can just kind of look at them, find it a bit easier to locate them in the session when they look like this, without all the sort of gaps of silence in the audio waveform. So because I've kind of controlled my vocal intonation with the flex pitch on all of these, I now have more options available as to what I want these vocals to sound like. So I don't necessarily need to use Little Altar Boy's pitch quantize anymore to correct the pitch of my notes because they're already sounding tighter than they were before. So for example, I could bypass all the Little Altar Boys and just have my natural vocal sound, or kind of closer to my natural vocal sound, which sounds like this. Or I've got the option of enabling that Little Altar Boy flavor. Which gives it that sort of vibe. Or the other thing that I could do, which I quite like, is I could not quantize my vocals but still shift the formant down, and I find that I feel like shifting the formant makes my voice sound a little deeper. I think when you listen back to your own vocals, it's impossible to not hear yourself sounding really nasal and like so let's see what that sounds like. So I'll disable the formant shift so you can hear it natural, and with the formant shift for me, I don't know, it just does a thing to warm the vocals up, and it makes it sound slightly less like me, which I kind of like. So I'm going to roll with that for now, because I don't think I need the pitch quantized sort of hip hop sound. So yeah, hopefully you can hear how it's not meant to be super intrusive, but it just thickens the arrangement at certain moments. And because it's like real human voice, it just brings a bit of life to the arrangement, I think. So I think I've achieved what I was looking to do with that. And I might not even end up using all of these vocals throughout the whole song. I might just use sections, but at least I've got them to work them in. Anyway, I'm now at a point with all of these recordings where I feel like I've got most of the sort of primary instrumentation that I wanted to add tracked in. I know that I want to add more to this. I want to add more electronic production. There's some more background kind of incidentals, electronic glitchy textures and stuff that I can add to this to fill it out even more. But for now, I'm going to move all of this into the main session. Might be a lot that happens in between what I'm filming now and when I come back to this. So if I do a lot without filming it, I'll try to recap or explain what I've done, because there might end up being a lot that I do without showing it. So I'm going to cut this here for tonight. Cool. Today is now Tuesday, the 4th of November. I'm now in Ableton, and you can see I've dragged in the drums guide again. So I'm just going to drag in the MIDI file for the bass. I'm just going to slap a preset bass on this from any synth in Ableton, just as a kind of starting place. This isn't going to sound good. So I'm just going to drop all of the MIDI for that down an octave so that I get this. And I'm now just going to go to town, basically adding some effects to this. So the first thing I'm going to pop in there, chuck an overdrive on that. So I can give that a bit of distortion characteristic. After that, I'm going to add something called Redux, which is essentially a bit crusher. So yeah, this obviously still sounds terrible, bear with me. After that, I'm going to put something called Erosion, which I can set to do this kind of like noisy, it adds a kind of like textural hiss on the top of the sound. So I can kind of start making it a little bit more aggressive that way. Then what I'm going to do is just chuck an OTT preset on this, which is just like a really intense multi-band compressor. And I'm actually going to duplicate this OTT maybe a few times. You see there, when I stop playing, or basically in between the gaps of silence now, you're probably going to notice that more over here. So now I'm getting that kind of, I'm getting some sort of like feedbacky kind of hiss and noise, because all of that distortion and stuff is basically getting compressed. It's bringing out all of that kind of hiss when the actual synth bass dies away. So. And I can kind of control that by bypassing OTT, so I might want a few more. That'll be useful for a couple of reasons in a bit. What I'm going to do is put a saturator effect at the end of my signal chain, and all I'm going to do with that, I'm not going to drive it, but I'm just going to turn the output down to minus 1. This just is going to mean that my sound never goes over. I'm essentially using it as a clipper or a limiter, just to make sure that this sound never goes over minus 0.1 dB, no matter what I do to it beforehand, kind of thing. I'm going to add this other third-party plugin called Effectrix, and I'm going to put that before the OTT compression here. And I'm just going to like, this is essentially, this is like a little multi-effects sequencer thing. So if I play the sound, if I play the bass sound and then just like put in a few blobs of effects, you should be able to see what this does pretty quickly. And something else, I mean, I might not need it for this section, but a beat repeat effect on that can also generate some kind of cool, nice, random rhythmic variations in that. I think I need some other kind of distortion characteristic in there to make this even more kind of aggressive. Maybe what I could try is, I might actually just put a neural DSP plugin on this and then essentially run this sound like through a guitar amp tone so I can make it kind of more abrasive that way. So let's try good old archetype opacity. I'll just keep it on the default settings. So what I'm trying to do now is maybe I'm not going to use that riff. Maybe I'll use this portion here because it's a bit. Right, so hopefully now you can see what I'm basically going for here, or trying to achieve, is a kind of gent synth bass, essentially. So it's more of an electronic, it's meant to be, you know, like a really heavy synth sound that is kind of doubling up or standing in for the role that that kind of low, genty guitar sound is doing. Trying to find the balance of effects where I get a default version of it that sits really well behind the drums and has that kind of nice punch. And you can see that's essentially what I'm doing with the... messing around with all these different effects and trying to get a cool sort of like tonal balance between them all, where they interact with each other to do something really like punchy and interesting is essentially the idea. You can hear some quite interesting things start to happen when I gradually mess with the rate of the bit crusher here. So also maybe if I change the amp type that I'm using in a bassu, that might be quite interesting. So and then again, maybe that's quite interesting, like messing with the cab section and like changing what mic is going on the amp sim of this bass sound. But I'm not even recording anything. I'm literally just like pissing around with making crazy noises, and something I love about this process. And essentially what I'm going to do, I mean, for each section of the song, this would probably take me ages to do on camera, but what I can do is set up an audio track that will record everything that I'm doing coming out of this channel. So anything that I mess with will all get recorded to audio. And essentially, like, it's going to be the same process as what I did with the guitars and bass earlier. I'm just going to record loads of takes So I get a load of different effects moments and different cool stuff to play with, because obviously some of that stuff is getting generated. I'm not necessarily in control of it. So every now and again, it will do something crazy that I'm like, oh my God, I didn't expect it to do that. And then I want to be able to work that in. So I'm just going to record as much stuff as possible and then see what I've got at the end and kind of chop in my favorite bits that I end up recording to collage together what would be the final bass part, I guess. I'll just show you quickly what I mean by that. So if I hit this track, I've set that track's receiving input to be the bass track above it and armed it to record. So if I now So my strategy here, obviously, because there's so much to play with, I can easily get lost and just sort of lose track. What I'm initially going to do with a riff like that is get a version of it that doesn't have all those effects on it, and the sort of closest thing to like the default, relatively effectsless version. Maybe even, you know, on this version of it, I might even want to put a gate at the end just to kind of chop out some of that noisy crap in between and just get it a little bit more tight sounding. So it's quite an abstract thing to try and explain what I'm looking for here, but I think you can obviously just hear it with your ears. I'm looking for like the distortion or the amp characteristic where the transients interact well and sit well with the drums already, essentially because I've recorded my bass and guitar to these drums. If I get this bass sounding good with the drums, then it should be relatively easy to get it sitting in with the bass and guitars that I've already recorded. So even though I haven't got them in here, that's kind of why, so I can hone in on if it's sitting well with the drums in isolation, then I should be able to get this to fit into the mix quite well. And the other thing I've not even tried is, of course, this is just the preset, or the thing that is starting all of this off is just this basic, you know, this preset at the beginning, which is just, if I bypass, I've just grouped all of those effects together so I can bypass them. The actual starting sound that's feeding all of this is this kind of terrible 303 bass preset, and then, you know, that's going into all of these effects. That's what that effects array is doing to that sound. But of course, if I change the preset bass that's feeding into that, then it will change everything else. It'll, you know, that completely changes how it affects everything else that it's feeding into. So I'll put that 303 bass back on. And what I can do here is just start experimenting with dragging other bass presets onto, you know, these are all just built into Ableton, so I'll just try dragging in some different tones. You start getting some pretty crazy stuff. Some of them obviously sound terrible and don't work at all. That would be because that preset has been maybe designed for a different octave to the MIDI that I'm feeding through it. But yeah, occasionally you pop something on and you get something quite interesting and a different tonal variation like that. So that's doing some crazy stuff. Another thing is, of course, changing the MIDI that is going into all of that can also affect the sound. So I feel like the MIDI notes that I've got here are perhaps just slightly too short for this sound, so it's getting choked out a bit. So let me just grab all of these slightly shorter customers and just lengthen them out a little bit so that the synth has a bit more chance to ring out, and see how that... Let's just call that like default bass. record a version of that in, and then I can add other different parts over the top of it. So I'll just show you what I mean. I've just recorded that through without touching any of the controls, just leaving it set in one setting so that it's kind of the same sound all throughout. But now, of course, let's say I want to, you know, start chopping in other bits of that take below. So now I can start to determine, you know, where I want the bass to just kind of be following with the drums and sticking to that default version of the bass riff. And then I've also got that option of just like occasionally cutting in, you know, different parts. If I record through loads of these, that gives me loads of different variations to chop in. And then I can just kind of construct a really, really awesome, gnarly version of this riff overall, with loads of interesting tonal and textural variation, and basically working at it to get the most satisfying, punchy version of that you can comp together. Remember the 5th of November. So today is the 5th of November, otherwise known as fireworks or bonfire night here in the UK. You may possibly even be able to hear fireworks being let off behind me in the background. I'm not quite sure if the mic's picking that up. But anyway, today I've just spent probably a couple of hours going through the song. And you can kind of see from the color coding where I've kind of patched in effecty versions of this riff. I've recorded a few different, maybe 4 or so other versions of this bass effects thing, just doing completely different settings on all of them, so I get kind of mix and match. And I've kind of patchworked what I think is the whole synth bass part together across the song, so it sort of looks like that. I have actually also dragged in the guitars and the bass into this so that I can have a listen to my synth bass in context with those as well, just to make sure that they kind of fit nicely. And yeah, I'll just have a little listen. So yeah, all that kind of noise that I was bringing out of this with the OTTs, the multiple OTT setup. Obviously, for most of this, I like having those gaps of silence between things. But every now and again, because of that feedback being there, it gave me a chance to put more effects on the feedback. And then I can kind of get some little fills and little stuff like that happening. So I can edit in little moments like that. And they just add a bit, I think. So. And kind of keep things interesting as we're developing along here. And yeah, something else you can see that I'm doing is kind of in these long held notes like this one. So there I'm crossfading between 2 different versions of that take with slightly different tonalities. On those long notes I can morph between, and that's getting me some interesting textural variation in these kind of long held notes. I really thought that this section needed something like this because obviously, like, I think the initial heavy guitar coming in is quite cool, but this section goes on for quite a while, and to keep that open, very slow guitar note thing interesting, yeah, putting in little things like that just kind of helps add some detail and interest as this plays through. And you'll see that happening here where it gets these long held bass notes rather than just using the same patch like the blue take all the way through. It's kind of mixing up the tones whilst this plays, so you get a quite a lot of variation, you know. So and then, yeah, so for this main riff bit, you can see that I've mostly kept the default blue bass take, but on these low B moments here, I'm cutting it to this other version of that B note, which I think gives it something quite cool. Might just tighten some of those up because I've edited it a bit poorly. But yeah, I think doing little things like that helps kind of beef up or bring out that low B note moment, so it's not just blending in with the rest of the tone. And I think that's helping that part of the riff to really pop out a little bit more, and helping the guitars to almost pop out a bit more as well. I think that's going to add something really nice in the full mix. I think now I'll drag this into the rest of the arrangement so I can start putting it in alongside everything else. I reckon I've probably shot about 40 hours of footage and trimmed it all down into this video, which is at the moment in my edit about an hour and 20 minutes long. So I've super condensed that period. And I am now finally at the actual full song arrangement and the full mix. Quite a lot has happened, and I've done quite a lot to this without showing it. So I'll kind of talk through a bit of it, and then I'll give you a play to hear how this is actually finally sounding together. Aleks sent me some tracks of his that he recorded with his Prophet Synth, which is a very nice bit of kit. He's recorded that through some sort of nice Neve preamp, so they're sounding pretty good. So these dark orange tracks that you see here are all Alex's stuff that we now have in here, which is cool. I've set up mix bus groups for everything, so that means I can process things as a group. The other thing that I've done is dragged in Alex's original demo into Magic AB. That's going to allow me to instantaneously swap between my mix in Logic and Alex's original demo, so I can compare what we've done, and I'm really excited to do that and show you what happens when I listen to his original demo and then compare it with what we've done in Logic to see how much it's done to it. And then the other thing here is that I've set up kind of, when I do my mix bus and my master bus, I mean, I wouldn't really say what I do is mastering. I put it in inverted commas, like mastering is what I'm doing. But essentially what I do with my master bus is give it processing that brings my track up to a really loud volume and other kind of mix stuff to make it sound competitive with tracks that are professionally mixed and mastered and that are out there on streaming services. So I feel like I can get it pretty close. What I will just do is play you what this sounds like when I'm not running it through the master bus, and then I'll send the whole mix through my master bus processing just so you can see what it does. So this is pre any mastering, and if I send this now through my mix bus, so you can probably hear straight away just how much my master bus processing does to everything, of course, and brings it up like, oh, okay, now I'm actually at kind of competitive volume level. Let's just have a play through this, and I'm going to compare it with Alex's original demo and then flick over to my final mix here to see if what I've done has actually improved this or not. So here we go. I'm going to start on Alex's mix and then flick over. So when I'm on B here, I'm listening to Alex's demo, and then when I go to A, it's going to be what's coming out of Logic. So I'll skip in a little bit to where these vocals kind of start as well. So. resist giving this bit a listen just to see what's happened here. I'm pretty chuffed with that. So I'm going to have a listen, just skip forward to the end a bit, just so I can hear the last part of the track. And you can see I've started to mess around with some kind of production element additions, like these little reverse whooshes here into this riff. And yeah, I'm trying out things like adding this little, this kind of terrifying, scary synth at the end, or this siren synth kind of thing that I've made in Serum. So it's basically just using an LFO to modulate these two fine-tuning controls of these two oscillators against each other. So you get that kind of, one's going down in pitch whilst the other's going up in pitch. So when they cross over, you get that kind of really kind of terrifying, abrasive thing going on. So. Okay, so just to summarize and recap what I've actually done so far. All of this obviously has roughly taken me about 8 days or 8 sessions to put this all together. So that's not been 8 consecutive days in a row. So I've been able to tackle this at my own pace and in my own time. So admittedly, maybe if I was in a studio setting where I was on the clock, I'd have worked through this a lot quicker. But of course, with projects like this, it's like I want to be able to spend my time tracking the bass and tracking the guitars in as much detail as I want. In that time, I have managed to reprogram the entire song's drum track. I've recorded the entire bass track for the whole song and edited that together. I've recorded all of the main quad-tracked guitar riff bits and obviously edited all of those as well, and also some additional ambient layers using the effects on the Helix. Then, of course, what I've done is edited all of the guitar and the bass tracks together, gone through them all with Isotope RX to remove the noise and any kind of intrusive clicks and stuff like that to clean them up. I have recorded multi-tracked vocals for most of the sections of the song and also gone through the RX denoising, declicking and deplosive setup on these as well. And then I've also intonated and controlled the pitch of all my vocals using flex pitch just to tighten up some of that vocal intonation. What else did I do? I created that kind of heavy industrial synth bass layer that's obviously very much inspired by Mick Gordon and Doom 2016 soundtrack kind of vibes. And that's adding a lot of additional kind of production detail and like real heavy abrasive weight to that gnarly guitar riff, and it's just like adding, I think, a lot just to make it even more aggressive. And I've created that all from scratch, which I showed you how to do in Ableton. Elsewhere, there's a few little things I've done, adding some production elements using things like Reaktor Space Drone. This is one of the built-in factory instruments in the Reaktor's library, as you can see here, and it comes under sound generators. And essentially this thing would just make noise constantly, and you can adjust the various parameters to affect how that sounds. So you get these really cool, very detailed and high quality sounding effects out of it, is the only way I can think to describe it. So for ambient sections or kind of slower, more atmospheric moments, I think this plugin can come really in handy for just easily and quickly generating some really interesting stuff like that. So for example, just letting that play over the piano solo, and then these little like whooshes over here. I've also layered up quite a lot of Alex's synth parts using tones and synths from Serum. Obviously layering in various other synth sounds. I've got all of Alex's tracks in here, and then of course what I've done finally is put everything on mix bus groups, given this all a kind of rough level mix, some processing on the groups here and there, and then of course finally I've got my mix master bus processing. Even with all of that, there's probably still a lot of work I need to do in these mix bus groups and to individual instruments to get them sitting even better, but this just gives me an overall picture and an overall shape of how this would sound finalized and mastered. I'm now at a point with this track where I don't really want to go much further with it yet, because what I've been working on this whole time, as you've been able to hear, apart from my sort of ambient vocals, this is all essentially just an instrumental track. So Aleks has been intending the whole time and planning to invite a vocalist onto this project to do lead vocals, and obviously with that in mind, I don't really want to proceed with mixing it or doing more to the mix processing until I've got all of that in there, because I just find it quite counterintuitive. So I kind of just prefer to have everything that is going to be in the mix in here before I start kind of moving on to that final bit of the process. So because I don't have those yet, this means I've kind of hit a juncture with this where I'm just going to probably end up leaving this project on the back burner, and it's probably going to end up collecting digital dust on my hard drive and just kind of languishing in a state of near finishedness, but not quite finished for potentially months. If you've enjoyed what I've been working on here today, you can go check out more of Alex's music as his band Ronyoy. They've got a couple of live videos you can check out. I also recently released a solo EP as my alias Luo, which deals with quite a lot of heavy guitar and all combined with electronic music styles like drum and bass and dubstep and breakcore and all that kind of fun stuff. And if you've enjoyed this kind of long form video music diary thingy bobby, I have another video out on my channel going into detail about how I created my Cactuar Collections project, which is basically my 3-album covers project that is dedicated to recreating various tracks from the video games Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy IX that I spent about 2 years putting together, so it's quite a bit more involved than what I did here, and there's a lot more kind of juicy detail that I go into on that. And there's also videos that you can find of me, Aleks and a bunch of my other pals playing some of those tracks live here on my channel as the Cactuar Collective sessions. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far and any of this was fun or useful to watch, then consider hitting those nice buttons that help me out as well. Hopefully catch you in my next video whenever that may be, and until then, take it easy.